All right, part two, getting into soil conservation. So we've got some strategies to preserve soil. We've got erosion prevention strategies, salt management, acidity control, and soil contamination prevention slash remediation processes. So let's get into erosion prevention a little bit. So we've got something called contour farming. This is on the quiz. That's going to be plowing across a slope. It's following lines of elevation, and it forms rows to slow runoff. So I'll show you a picture of what erosion or contour farming is. Um, it's it's a lot like terracing. So terracing is when you have leveled sections or terraces on hilly, cultivated areas that slow or prevent runoff effects. I'll show you a picture right here. This is terracing. So it's also contour farming. So you're going along the contour lines of this little highland area, and this prevents erosion. So you have like areas of inundation right here, and then the water will fall down. It'll get inundated around here. So it's not just going all down one certain area and eroding that whole land. So we've got conservation tillage systems as well. It's going to be like soil preparation for tillage anyway, and that's going to be plowing and tilling. So we talked about tilling with the California Ricelands and Wetlands Management Act. That's when those birds came through and just kind of use their feet to till the soil. That's going to slow water movement, and it reduces soil compaction, which means there's more area for water to go inside of the soil. So when it's compacted, water kind of runs off of it, and that's how water movement increases, and then erosion increases that way as well. We also do this thing called crop rotation, which is growing a series of dissimilar crops seasonally in the same area for sequential seasons. So you have right here corn, right here beans, right here squash, something like that. Next year it's going to be right here beans, right here corn, right here squash, because they're like changing them because all of these plants use different nutrients. So you're essentially just using all the nutrients in the soil per season. Like beans are going to be nitrogen fixators, so they kind of like create nitrogen in the soil down in there, and then they're able to use that nitrogen up as well. And then crops afterwards are going to have an excess of nitrogen, which helps them grow. So essentially, what they're doing is they're changing the crops around seasonally. So these different plants have different areas to grow, and it doesn't get rid of all of the nutrients in the soil. This improves soil structure and fertility, and it avoids depleting nutrients in the soil. So it's just a really sustainable way of farming. Another thing that we do we have windbreaks. So it's going to be like those hedgerows we talked about. It's rows of trees or shrubs that provide shelter from the wind. They also hold the ground together, and this wind protection protects the soil from erosion. So this is going to be protecting the soil from erosion due to wind erosion, not water erosion. We also have a thing called cover crops. So I talked about nitrogen fixers like legumes, which are beans. They're plants that are grown to improve soil conditions. They just add more nitrogen into the soil, so they create a really, really good environment for other crops. So here again are some hedgerows right in there. And then so imagine for crop rotation, this is corn one season, this is beans one season, this is squash. Next season it's going to be beans, squash, corn, squash, corn, beans. So then these areas will have the right amount of nutrients and the soil will not be depleted. Let's get into salinity and acidity control. So salinity is salt, and salt is kind of a basic, on the pH scale, it's basic, and then acid is acidic on the pH scale. So to control salinity, we use humic acids, so it's an acid, and we talked about humus a little bit earlier. Humic acids are a major part of humus. Should say humus, which is soil organic matter, and that's really, really nutrient-rich soil. And with that humic acid, it decreases salt ions. It creates more of a neutral environment. Really, the thing here is that you don't want it to get too basic. You don't want it to be too basic, and you don't want it to be too acidic. So you have to find like that happy medium there. And for acidity control, what they're essentially doing, this is a quiz question, are replacing lost cation nutrients. And cation nutrients are more basic. That's the way I'm going to describe it. It gets more into chemistry there, but essentially they're going to bond with acidic solutions. They're going to create a more neutral to basic solution. And an example of a cation that they use is calcium. This is a naturally occurring nutrient in the soil, but it's called a cation because of its properties. So it's got that positive property. Normally positives are basic. So this is calcium 2 plus. That's just a cation that they use. And to get that cation into the system is they just add limestone to the system. So a lot of fertilizers are going to have some limestone in it, depending on where you are and the need. So that's going to be acidity control. And then soil contamination prevention / remediation. What we do here is for the prevention, we have guidelines for handling hazardous waste. We ban the use of known pollutants, and the government use grants for sustainable farming practices. So a lot of farmers now get paid to grow grass between the road and their crops because that helps preserve the soil. It also helps to kind of reduce the impact on fertilizer runoff as well. So they're just essentially getting paid to grow grass instead of put more crops there. And that's a good way of just keeping the environment sustainable and kind of getting rid of soil degradation and preventing a little bit of that pollution from runoff. So let's talk about soil contamination remediation. We have all these different ways here. The important one for the quiz here to know is that to excavate the soil and take it to a disposal site, that's the worst method because what you're doing is you're taking away all of that soil from an area. So essentially you're just destroying that ecosystem and getting rid of all those nutrients. So you don't want to have to do this, but they do it if it gets too bad. Another thing they do is soil aeration, which is just at the contamination site, they go underneath of it, they aerate the soil so the contaminants kind of rise up through the soil and they're able to get rid of them that way. They also apply heat for vapor extraction. So a lot of landfills do this. They just naturally have a lot of heat in the landfill due to methane, but they have these little vents. And so those vents are essentially just letting this vaporized methane out of the landfill. And methane isn't so great for the environment, but we'd rather have it out than have a huge bomb underneath of us because a lot of methane together mixed with fire creates an explosion. So that's something to think about. And microbial digestion is a way that we do it. So we put microbes underneath of the ground. We have a lot that we have genetically modified to be able to eat certain contaminants like oil, other types of pollutants, and that's called bioremediation. So bioremediation is a really, really good thing. It has a really small impact on the environment. It's generally a good thing, positive impact. And then the last thing that we're going to talk about is paving or capping an area of containment with cement. This is generally with like radioactive waste. We do that. Instead of like trying to take it out and mess with it, we'll just pave it and we'll cap this whole area. We'll put it underneath of a mountain and then cave it in or pave it in, with cement so that stuff can't get out and get into the water system. So genetically modified foods are another way that we get into agriculture. So we can genetically modify plants to be disease resistant and pest resistant, and that's going to reduce the need for pesticides greatly. That's a really good thing. We also have an antifreeze gene that we've been putting into crops. So crops can survive cold temperatures, they can survive early frost, they can survive in areas where naturally they would not be able to survive, which is awesome. We have drought-resistant crops that we've genetically modified. Those are really great. And then a big one that I'm going to talk about is golden rice because it's got kind of a controversy surrounding it. But golden rice is cool because it produces beta-carotene. That's in a lot of carrots. And beta-carotene is a supplemental source of vitamin A. So the interesting thing about this is that vitamin A deficiency is the leading cause of blindness among children. So in a lot of impoverished areas, they don't get a good source of vitamin A. So a lot of their children are going blind, and then you don't come back from that. So they're blind into adulthood as well. So just being able to provide them a supplemental source of vitamin A really cheaply with this golden rice, because rice can be cultivated very quickly and cheaply, is awesome for these people in these areas. The controversy, there's a lot of controversy around this, but the main one is that it went from publicly owned to privately. So The people that need it aren't really able to farm it the way that they were previously. They have to like lease land from a large company now to be able to farm that. And then also beta carotene is not absorbed as well as vitamin A. That's another little controversy. So we can do better. We need to work on it. Also, people are worried about golden rice crops getting into their white rice crops and kind of destroying that population of rice. So that's another thing that people need to be careful of, is letting their golden rice become invasive. And here's a nice little picture of golden rice there. And that is going to be the end of this second video. So if you have questions, comments, concerns, let me know. Otherwise,